Welcome to Reimagining Cyber. I'm Rob Aragao. Today's episode focuses on a part of the market that's often underserved, but increasingly under attack: small and mid-sized businesses. As cyber threats grow more sophisticated and resources remain limited, many small, medium-sized businesses are struggling to build security programs that are both effective and sustainable. To help us unpack that challenge, we're joined by MK Palmore, a former FBI cyber leader who turned cybersecurity executive, to discuss why the traditional enterprise security model doesn't always work for SMBs, how the fractional CISO approach is reshaping cyber leadership, and where AI may become a force multiplier for lean security teams. Hey, MK. Well, I think one of the key areas we obviously want to focus our attention on with the conversation having here today is definitely as it relates to cybersecurity specific to the SMB space. And you've had great focus in that area. Why don't you share with the audience a little bit of the background and context around cybersecurity as it specifically relates to the SMB space?
Yeah, Rob, thanks for having me on. And this is a great place to start the conversation. So as folks look at my background, and as you well know, I spent, better than 3 decades across public sector service. I was a special agent in the FBI for 22 years. I had a fantastic opportunity towards the end of my career to take a leadership role for a large-scale cybersecurity investigative team based in FBI San Francisco. I retired from government service and then went to enterprise, 2 Fortune 500 companies as a cybersecurity executive. And it was during the combination of that time that I recognized that the SMB space, quite frankly, as it relates to cybersecurity, gets largely ignored by solution providers and folks who are in a position, I think, to help these small to medium-sized businesses combat what is a global threat. The challenge that they face on the market, quite frankly, is one of resource allocation. Unfortunately, adversaries don't care how big or how small you are. They only know about vulnerabilities and the ability to deliver exploits. And so the small to medium-sized business space is adversely impacted to a large degree because they can't operate at the same level as the big boys and girls on the block. And that opens the door for folks like me to come in and help them figure out different ways to scale their security teams and security apparatus in a way that I think functionally is different than the way they may be thinking about it. And so the challenge is present. It's there. They absolutely need the help, and they are by far impacted by adversarial activity in ways much bigger than the large-scale enterprise.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. This is a space that is unfortunately typically neglected by a lot of the different cybersecurity capabilities, solutions in the marketplace. And I think it's great what you're doing as it relates to helping them solve these big problems because, as you just really kind of amplified, at the end of the day, they're just as much a target as a big Fortune 100. And in many cases, sometimes people don't realize that some of these smaller, medium-sized businesses do have some pretty fruitful data, let's call it, that the attackers are going to want to get after. And so, yeah, for sure, I think it all makes the great sense of you applying energy towards this particular area. When you look at the core problem, you talked about some of these things, right? They're not always going to get the top resources in the marketplace, right? The costs sometimes are too difficult. The attraction to an SMB isn't the greatest for that individual as opposed to going to a Fortune 1000, for example. But what do you see as kind of the most difficult area for them? Like, what are the biggest mistakes that they're currently making in the marketplace today, the SMBs that is, to get what they need from a coverage, if you will, around cybersecurity?
Yeah. The biggest mistake that I see them making is that they try and build security teams and a security apparatus that matches the footprint and methodology of a large-scale enterprise. So large-scale enterprise thinks about cybersecurity as a domain that needs to be covered, and they may think about multiple teams that they need to stand up in order to protect a large-scale enterprise. You have your SOC team, you have your separate GRC team, you have a separate team that maybe interacts and handles interactions with the product folks. And so you have multiple lanes for which you have to resource with personnel, and oftentimes you're looking for people, quite frankly, with deep experience. And maybe you have 100-person, 150-person overall cybersecurity element in a large-scale enterprise. It may be even larger if you go across financial services, the big banks, the folks who have been in the cybersecurity industry and business for quite a long time. And unfortunately, SMBs look at that example and they're like, well, we have to build our own cybersecurity team too. So they go about the process of potentially building a SOC or identifying not only a CISO, which is going to cost a significant amount of money to hire someone with real experience. That CISO comes in and that person, the first thing they're going to be thinking about is, what team do I need to surround myself with in order to be able to effectively do this job? So everyone starts kingdom building. And then you run into the shortage of money, right? No one has unlimited resources for which to build these teams. And so SMBs have to be thinking about solving the problem at scale in a very different way than large scale enterprises. And that's where the whole idea of fractional support or moderated support that may be an adjunct to their growth and scale. And it's a way for them to tackle the problem, do it in a diligent fashion. You still get high-level enterprise expertise, and we can certainly get into the conversation of all of the expertise that's out on the bench right now and folks who are available to do this kind of work. But I think they need to be looking at the problem in a uniquely different fashion than maybe historically they have. And I will tell you that lots and lots of experts who are available are taking this very similar approach of fractional help in order to solve the problems of the security apparatus.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, right? It's definitely a different approach, but I want to go back to what you described as an approach the SMBs have historically taken, which is trying to kind of build their cyber teams to be in line with what you may get at a large financial services organization, and it doesn't really marry itself appropriately, as you called out. One of the things I want to ask you about that approach is, typically in the SMB space, you also see kind of more consolidated teams. You see the CIO or CTO role, and cyber sometimes kind of falls underneath that. How have you seen kind of that working relationship in these SMBs also come to realization that we do need to put a little bit more emphasis on what we're doing from a cyber perspective? We're not going to go and actually have the maturity capabilities to do what these larger organizations are doing, but let's be very focused in these areas and how we're actually going to accomplish that. Like, what are some of the things that you've been seeing there that's different as well on that relationship between the CIO, CTO, and security?
So one of the things that I think is, and I'm smiling a little bit because I think this is really a problem in the technology space. One of the challenges I see, especially with young technology organizations, and by young, I mean in terms of the maturity and their time in existence, is that they concentrate very heavily on product, which means they are spending time and resources building their product, bringing that product to market, continuing to perfect that product. And the things that happen and evolve around the development of that product oftentimes involve security, but security isn't yet called out as a separate function. And it's not until these organizations get to the point where they either want to do business at a particular level, where there's a regulatory requirement to have maybe an audit in place that allows them to then scale their business and operate in verticals that they hadn't previously been able to operate in. It's not until that point that they say to themselves, wow, we don't have this audit. But if they had had a security leader on board, that security leader in all likelihood would have conducted that audit, or at least done a pre-audit and prepared them for that eventuality. And so it's interesting to note, especially in the technology space, you get a CTO typically in charge of building the product. You got a CEO who may or may not be technically minded, but that's your head of business development, and they're off to the races. And their products in the market, they're delivering that product. And then finally, the light bulb goes off and says, hey, maybe we need to think about hiring a security lead, because believe me, the development engineer has been the security lead in that organization until they get to the point where they decide they want to hire a security leader. And then they go out to market and figure out that it's really expensive to hire a deeply experienced CISO. So maybe you get one who's deeply experienced. I don't care who they are. They're going to come into an organization and start kingdom building. They have to build resources around them in order to be able to do the job that you've hired them to do. And so then they're playing catch up. They haven't been on board with the organization. The security apparatus has not matured with the organization the way the product has matured with the organization. And so there may have been technical debt, decisions that were already made for which the CISO now has to fold into and appropriately build controls, governance, compliance around what is already established. And that can be a difficult proposition. And so I think as we get into this topic of the fractional approach, they can actually bring on board someone much earlier in the cycle who can at least plant the seeds and have them thinking about how they should organize their security team, how they should organize the information, how they need to be documenting certain actions related to their efforts in security, so that when the time comes when they're going through that pre-audit phase or they're looking at regulatory compliance, they are at least prepared. They've got the lanes open and designated, and they're ready to start filling that bucket with information that's going to be needed in order to pass those regulatory flyers. Most are not thinking about that, and they don't think about it until well down the lane.
Very reactive based approach.
Yeah, very reactive. Yeah.
Yeah. I hear you. And I completely agree with you. I think it's that security first mindset approach, understanding the power that doing security right up front impacts for the business and the fast pace and growth that business is going through, and really ensuring that security, trust, resilience, liability even are baked into that. Much easier done at the onset versus, as you said, patchwork thereafter. So that takes us to, as you've been describing, this kind of rethinking the approach and the model to the fractional CISO, and really maybe walk us through, right? How do you define what the fractional CISO is, the capabilities that they bring forth? You kind of touched upon that already, but maybe share it as well as in an example, an experience that you've had been very impactful for an organization.
The way I've seen this work really, really well, and what we do with my team at Apogee is, one, we want to, in the discovery phase, really understand where the client is and where they are on their journey and what they're looking to accomplish in the near term, the next 3 to 6 months, maybe even the next year. Once we've determined that, we can assess what type of team that we need to put together. Our approach, we call it a pod structure. I basically put together a pod specific to that client's needs. There's always a senior security leader, someone who maybe has served as a CISO, someone who's just what I might call a CISO light. In other words, they've done all of the jobs associated with the security team and apparatus. They've led at very high levels, but maybe they haven't been a designated CISO. That person is the team leader. I also assign a program manager, someone who understands the pacing necessary, the types of regimented approach to documentation that you need to have in place. Maybe there's a security SME, someone who's a very high level, deeply technically oriented person with experience with cloud security, experience with on-premise security. Maybe they've come up in the IT realm and switched over to security at some point, and that person gets assigned to the team. And then what I might call the utility position, a fourth position, might be whatever is specifically needed for that client. Maybe it's someone with GRC expertise. Maybe it's someone with SOC expertise. It depends on where the client happens to be. And with a core team of about 4 people, you can really start to address not only the GRC component, but you can start thinking much more strategically about the types of things that you need to be thinking about and implementing from a cybersecurity perspective. And with that technical SME on the team, you actually have someone who can do hands-on engagement. Then taking that responsibility off of the shoulders of probably the developer engineer who's been wearing multiple hats as a security professional and developer during the course of that company's maturation. And then as I just described it, it's a modular approach. You can add on to that team or subtract depending on what the nature of the work is. It's not 40-hour-a-week work, so you're not hiring personnel permanently. You're also not going down the road of, quite frankly, I've seen a number of instances where, an SMB goes out and hires a security professional as their CISO, and after about 8 months, but that person doesn't work out. You've now wasted a bunch of time bringing this person on board, money. I heard a good saying once from a leader in the industry is that the time that you spend after you identify that someone's not right for a role is the time that is most wasted for most companies. Like when you determine that someone's not right for a role, you need to be ready to pivot nearly immediately. And most companies don't do that. They let that languish. They maybe buttress that person up with additional people around them. Maybe they move them across to a different role in the organization. But with the fractional method, you get to basically see productivity and you hold them accountable at the 3-month, 6-month mark. If that team is not being productive, you cut bait and you move on to another resource. Now that might seem like a waste of time, but what it is it's a trust building phase. You have to give them time, one, to engage. You have to hold them accountable, give them time to report back to you. And I've seen historically that if the relationship is done right, if you're clear in the SAL, what your expectations are in terms of what that team's supposed to produce, you're actually able to move the ball down the field at a fraction of the cost you would be if you had to hire a permanent team to do all of that work. They can be effectively engaged. And boy, in the market right now, and there's a lot at play here, there's a lot of expertise. There are a lot of folks out there who understand this fractional model, and they bring deep, deep experience. And this is the kind of work, quite frankly, that they want to do. They want to do project-based work. I think we're getting away from the time where folks really want to embed themselves long-term in any one particular organization, because people like fractional work because it gives them a ton of freedom on their personal side to be able to have some kind of work-life balance, right? They got a project, they have defined deliverables. As long as they can hit those deliverables, it's great. They make the money they need to make, and they also get to keep up their bona fides in terms of their expertise within the industry. When that project's done, maybe they've got a little bit of time on the bench, but then they're on to the next project that's pitched to them.
Yeah.
The model really works.
No, I've seen it in action. I wholeheartedly agree with you. It works. I think one of the things you called out that's critically important as well is, as you were talking about, if you're hiring someone as a CISO full-time and it takes a little bit of time, 8, 9, 10 months to realize probably not the right fit, what do you do at that point? And so you didn't just lose that time of 8 to 10 month window of them being in the seat. You lost the time before that in the recruitment process to identify the person. And now you lost that forward time until you figure out who the right person is. And then they'll ramp up to realize how to actually take care of cyber within the particular organization they're now coming into. And you said, hey, listen, from a fractional perspective, we can come in, we can do things, and we can do them actually at, a 3 to 6 month kind of incremental basis. That tells me a lot about what you're doing within your own business, because that means that you have the belief and the willingness to be able to put that type of actual kind of constraint on yourselves back.
Right.
Have a short window of time, because it sounds to me you firmly believe you're going to deliver, and you can deliver where they're going to come back and say, well, yeah, of course we want to continue this relationship and move forward. So I think that's a great call out, and something that sometimes people look at as it is just a project and then they kind of move on to the next one. But it sounds like what you're really focused your attention on is, yeah, we'll deal with the project, but the reality is establishing that credibility, that relationship, that trust for the long term as we go, and you guys continue to mature your business as well. So that's great to hear overall. Yeah. I want to wrap us up as it relates to the topic you probably haven't talked about at all yet, MK, AI. But I have to ask, right? When it comes to AI, specifically to the SMB space, how do you see it reshaping cybersecurity for that type of particular market segment?
Yeah. I've said in other conversations, I'm particularly bullish about the presence of AI. I use it as a business owner. I've seen at least the headlights of what it's capable of doing. I am impressed about the direction that we're headed in. Here's what I think it can be a difference maker for SMBs in the cybersecurity realm. I think that we're getting to a point, and we will see this come to fruition, where AI acts as and solves for the challenge that the cybersecurity industry has faced since its inception, and that is organizations do not do the fundamentals. Well, guess what? If you've got an AI agent that you can just tell, hey, follow the framework for the NIST CSF and make sure that this organization is in line with NIST CSF, right? Or choose any framework of your choice. Tell the agent that, go out and research the CIS critical controls. Examine our environment and make a determination as whether or not we're adhering to the CIS critical controls. And it goes out and does that. Boy, your gaps are identified immediately, and you know exactly what you need to do. I think we're even going to get to a point, we're not there yet, where these agents are acting on our behalf, and you tell them to go out and adhere to the fundamentals. They will enact the controls and do the kinds of things that need to be done. So I think that what's going to happen is that the practice of cybersecurity is going to be leveled up significantly through the use of AI. And I think that will solve a lot of the resource constraints and challenges that SMBs face. And again, we're not there yet. As you well know, we're in inning 3 of a 9-inning game as it relates to AI. There's still a lot on the horizon. There's some great companies out there that are doing some really forward-leaning work as it relates to how to apply AI to cybersecurity. So I'm interested in seeing where the industry goes in that regard. And I think our ability as practitioners to respond to the types of threats that we're seeing out there on the horizon will be infinitely better through the use of AI as a tool to help us combat the threats that are out there on the landscape. So I'm really excited about where we're headed.
Yeah, I'm bullish as well. I think that it's understanding the power that it brings with the human in the loop aspects of still helping make the right decisions based on the context they understand about the organization that they're a part of, and help kind of reshape and adjust the supporting actor, if you will, with the AI agents helping us along the way. So great example of how it can be beneficial, especially for SMBs. I like the idea of almost automation, if you will, of the frameworks and some examples. So you never know, right? Definitely is possible. Some of the things we're already starting to see. But MK, thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your perspective and bringing your background in this area of helping the SMB segment, and also, most importantly, how to approach it from the fractional CISO model. It just makes a heck of a lot of sense for that type of particular vertical market that we're trying to support and level up as well. So thanks again for joining us today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Rob. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to Reimagining Cyber. If you enjoyed this conversation with MK, be sure to subscribe, share this episode with the network, and join us next time as we continue exploring the ideas, strategies, and technologies reshaping the future of cybersecurity. Until next time, goodbye.